Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's discussion, Inside the Mind of Professor Adam Grant, presented by the Wharton School in collaboration with Ivy Exec. My name is Alex Baran-Perea. I am one of our co-founders here at Ivy Exec, and I'm truly honored to be moderating our conversation today with two incredible thought leaders of their time, Wharton Professor Adam Grant, of course, as well as Wharton School Dean Erika James. Now, before we begin, we have a brief housekeeping list of to-dos just for our audience. We appreciate all of those that are attending. All of the attendees are in listen-only mode, so we do want to encourage you to engage in this discussion despite that by asking questions in your control panel. You'll see that somewhere on your screen, I'm sure. Please do send your questions to us through that questions box. Our two guests, Adam and Erika, will be answering your questions throughout. I will be the voice of the audience, if you will, so I'll be looking for your questions as they come through. We'll have discussion between Erika and Adam here for the first half hour, interspersed with some questions from myself or the audience. We'll then have a formal Q&A, if you will, at the 30-minute mark of our discussion today. Additionally, we're recording our conversation. I'm sure many that have registered may not be able to attend live. So you also, as attendees, can look forward to receiving a copy of the recording in the coming days. And so with that, I will pass it on to Peggy Bishop-Lane, Vice Dean of the Wharton MBA for Executives program, to say a few words and to introduce our guests. Peggy?
Thank you so much, Alex, and welcome everyone to today's webinar, which is sponsored by the Wharton MBA program for executives. As Alex said, I'm Dr. Peggy Bishop-Lane, the Vice Dean of the program and also an accounting professor. The Wharton MBA program for executives is one of two ways that someone could earn the Wharton MBA degree. Our program is suited to mid-level and executive level professionals in a variety of fields, industries, and functions, including media, finance, government, entrepreneurship, and data analytics. The program is an every other weekend format in both Philadelphia and San Francisco. And if a full MBA degree isn't for you, Wharton also offers an extensive series of executive education courses through our non-degree exec ed programs. Today, we are pleased to have with us two of Wharton's great minds. First, we have the Dean of the Wharton School, Dr. Erika James, the Reliance Professor of Management and Private Enterprise, who joined Wharton almost 1 year ago. She is a leading expert in crisis leadership, workplace diversity, and management strategy. Dean James will be digging deep into the mind of Professor Adam Grant, the Saul P. Steinberg Professor of Management, a frequent winner of the Excellence in Teaching Award and the Goes Above and Beyond the Call of Duty Award at Wharton. He is the host of Work Life, a TED original podcast, is the co-director of People Analytics at Wharton, and serves on the board of Lean In and the Defense Innovation Board at the Pentagon. He was named to Fortune's 40 Under 40 list. You've probably seen his books in stores, online, and on bestseller lists. He's the author of 4 New York Times best-selling books, Give and Take, Originals, Option B, co-authored with Sheryl Sandberg, and his most recent book, Think Again, which explores how rethinking happens, how we change our minds, how we persuade others, and how we build cultures of lifelong learning. In their conversation, we will hear one organizational psychologist delve into the mind of another to understand how he chooses what to study and write about, what he sees for the future of business education, and its impact on the business world. We hope you'll find this conversation not only interesting and useful, but that it gives you a glimpse into the research and the thinking or rethinking that faculty bring into the classroom. Here today to delve inside the mind of Professor Adam Grant is Dean James and Professor Grant. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. That was a great introduction. And Adam, great to be here with you.
So happy to be here, Erika. I'm going to turn the tables, though, because I want to go in your mind.
All right, we'll be in each other's minds. As two psychologists, this is what we do. Well, I'm thrilled to have a chance to spend some time with you, and I know that our audience will also really much look forward to understanding a bit more about what makes Adam Grant tick and how you think about your work and your research. But I want to start actually with your newest book, Think Again. Why this book? Why now?
Well, the why now is really an accident. The why this book is I've spent most of my life frustrated that I come into workplaces with systematic evidence and leaders say things like, well, that's not the way we've always done it, or that will never work here. And I think just that happened one too many times. And I think the big moment for me was winter 2018. I went to a bunch of Fortune 500 CEOs and unicorn startup founders. And I said, look, we already have good evidence that as long as people are in the office half the week, you can get more productivity, more satisfaction, higher retention, and no cost to collaboration by letting people work from anywhere the other half the week. But I'd love to try something smaller. Let's just run a remote Friday experiment. Give people 1 day a week to work from wherever they want. Every single leader I pitched, Erika, turned me down. And it's been fun to watch them over the past year say, we're either permanently remote as a company or we're going to go to a hybrid plan. You know, if you had rethought your resistance in 2018, you could have had all of 2018 and 2019 to figure out how to make remote work before we were going through a global pandemic, and also before you were trying to manage your kids at home and online school at the same time. And I think those failures to think again, they can only happen so many times before I say, okay, somebody needs to write this book. And eventually I realized no one else was going to write it, so I did.
I love that story. I had a similar experience when I was at Emory University and the pandemic had started. And the previous year, I was talking with our faculty about sort of leveraging technology in new and different ways to have greater access. And they were like, no, that's never going to happen. We're not going to need that. Why would we ever do that? And lo and behold, a year later, you know, had we thought to the point of your book, had we thought differently when we didn't have to, we could have perhaps been even more prepared. So it's I love that this concept has demonstrated real value in real time. So that's such a needed concept. One of your gifts as a scholar and as a public intellectual, Adam, is the ability to translate academic knowledge for any consumer of knowledge, regardless of the position or title or academic background. Tell us, you know, what you expected to learn when you started writing Think Again, and did your own thinking have to pivot or be rethought in the context of the data that you were actually observing?
Yeah, I think I made a pretty systematic error when I started writing this book, which is I started writing it to teach. I thought, okay, I've accumulated a lot of knowledge about how we can get people to question their assumptions and what it takes to open others' minds, forgetting that I was the one who was failing at this, right? That I should have had the tools already to get leaders to rethink their assumptions, and I didn't. And so I think the big moment of rethinking for me was saying, you know what, I actually need to write this book to learn or to teach myself, as opposed to assuming that I know something that I'm going to teach others. And what that opened the door to was me realizing that I have had this experience repeatedly throughout my life. It started when I was a kid. It's carried over into my role as a professor, the work I do advising and consulting, where when somebody resists my point of view, I double down and I argue harder. And I didn't really realize that that was a mistake until I had a student call me a logic bully. And I remember I was in the middle of a conversation with a student making a big career decision, and I thought that she was very clearly leaning in one direction, and I was worried that she might have some blind spots. So I gave the most passionate argument I could in the opposite direction. And she pushed back, and I pushed back again. Eventually she said, Adam, you're a logic bully. I was like, a logic what? She said, a logic bully. You just keep bombarding me with data and with facts and with reasons, and I don't agree, but I don't feel like I can fight back. And Erika, at that point, it hit me. I have done that repeatedly throughout my life, and it leads the other person to defend, to attack, or to withdraw. And I needed to find a different way to try to engage those disagreements. And the big thing that I've done differently now is I like to come into a disagreement as soon as I realize that somebody has a different point of view and acknowledge my own shortcomings. So I'll come into the conversation and say, I have a bad habit of going into logic bully mode. I don't want to be that person anymore. If you catch me doing that, please call me out. And often people do call me out, which helps me course correct. But also it invites the other person to commit to openness too. When I admit to being a logic bully, most of the time the other person will say, oh, you have no idea, I am the most stubborn person on earth, and I don't want to be like that either. And then we're both agreeing to learn something from each other. It completely changes the way that I have debates when I remember to do it.
So I love that you're saying this, because I immediately go to what's happening now in just sort of the political realm, where people on both sides of the aisle are just so entrenched in a certain position that, I mean, that's the grandest of logic bullying, if you will, to some respect. And I don't mean to take this down a political bent, but I think that the world right now in particular would benefit from this perspective of stepping back and engaging and listening and inquiring, as opposed to just advocate for a single position.
Completely agree. And one of the places where I've caught this is, I've gotten into heated arguments with people over the past lifetime of mine. This is my mode of being, apparently. And at some point, somebody likes to say, all right, we're just going to have to agree to disagree. And I've started objecting to that. And I say, no, I actually don't believe in that. Although in theory, I'm open to rethinking anything. But I think if we agree to disagree, we are disrespecting our ability to have a thoughtful discussion, right? We're basically giving up. We're saying we are incapable of listening to each other and learning from each other on this topic. And I don't believe I'm incapable of learning from anyone on anything. So when you say, let's agree to disagree, that's a cue for me that it's time for me to stop arguing to win and start asking questions to learn. And also that it's a chance for me to say to the person, you know what, clearly I've lost you here. Tell me where I missed the mark and what I could have said that might have made you more curious. And the hope is then I can apply that next time that we talk, or even that it's relevant to the argument I have with the next 9 people who I disagree with.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you're obviously a very evolved person, right? And you think about things at a higher level than perhaps the average person, and you've come to that as a solution for how to continue to engage productively. How does that come through in Think Again? Was that the goal that you had with Think Again, was to really encourage people to do the self-work that is required to change their approach to engagement?
That was my hope. I wrote a good chunk of it sort of as a letter to a good friend of mine from growing up who takes pride in calling himself the most stubborn person anyone will ever meet. And I thought, okay, if I can get through to him, I could get through to almost anyone. And I tried to write the book as an invitation, right, to let go of knowledge and opinions that are no longer serving you well. And to extend that invitation to other people in your life who might be clinging to old convictions that no longer make sense. And I checked in with him a week or so ago and wondered if he had resonated with anything I wrote. And he said, "Oh, I was too mad at you from the argument that we had. I haven't bought it. I swore I wasn't going to read it." And that I had to tell him that in fact he was referenced in it, and he sent me a picture of himself holding the book the next day. I don't know if he's going to read it, but I think everybody has that person in their life, and if you could imagine the best version of you showing up to not bully that stubborn friend or family member or colleague, but instead saying, how can I get them to naturally be curious enough that they go out and learn, that they want to pull information out of me instead of me kind of shoving it down their throat. That was the tone that I wanted to write this book in, and I guess you can be the judge of whether I succeeded or not.
Well, I think every one of your books has succeeded in so many ways in terms of changing how we function, how we operate, and how we interact. And I suspect if your friend doesn't read the whole book, he will likely at least thumb through to find the page where he's mentioned.
Maybe, I don't know. I might just call him one day and start reading it to him and see how he reacts. But Erika, I'm curious. You came into this role as our dean, which we were all incredibly excited about, saying, what a novel idea that an organizational psychologist who studies crisis leadership and also diversity should be running a business school, but especially at a time when we're going through massive crisis, and also when we're going through, I think, one of the biggest reckonings on race that this country has faced in modern times. Mm-hmm. Is there anything that you've rethought in the past year, given that you've had to put into practice much of what you teach and study?
Yeah, so, well, thank you for asking. Interestingly, my appointment was announced before the pandemic really hit the US. So, like, we had heard of COVID, but we didn't really, it wasn't a thing, and it hadn't affected us so much yet. But literally within a matter of 2 weeks, everything had changed. And so knowing that I would be entering into the Wharton School in this context where I wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity to be onboarded, if you will, and have that orientation experience, meet people personally, understand the place of the Wharton School, caused me to think differently about how would I, in fact, establish credibility as a new leader without having the standard protocols for being able to do so. And I think that was the biggest challenge. I've shared with you and some of our colleagues on this call in our last faculty meeting that I actually met my husband in an airport in the first 5 years. I mean, actually the first 20, however many years we've been together, has been long distance. We had this commuter marriage. And so I've had to learn how to leverage technology to build relationships because it started with my husband. And so this actually felt it was not desirable, but it was natural for me to have to use this new, set of skills to build relationships and establish leadership philosophy within the Wharton context, which, so I've thought differently in terms of how to engage and how to lead, how to build relationships in this new world. And I think they are skills that will serve all of us well going forward, even when we're not restricted to just technology for our relationships going forward.
I hope so. There are things that I definitely don't want to leave behind. I have been allergic to the idea of teaching virtually since the day the first Coursera course was announced. I was like, no, yeah. I teach experiential learning. I want to bring the classroom to life. I want to feel the energy of the room, and I especially want to build relationships with my students. And I can't imagine doing that through a screen. So I just resisted every single form of online education we were doing. And then, of course, COVID happened. And I remember we got an email from you one day saying classes will be online, which was the most non-threatening, delightful version of delivering bad news that I've ever received. And I thought, okay, this is a true master of crisis leadership, right? Who just told me that my worst fear in the classroom is coming true, but actually left me a little bit excited about it. And I have to tell you, I have completely rethought that. I had the richest conversations that I've ever had in a classroom teaching over Zoom. And it stunned me largely because of the chat window that as you know, I teach a core course with Sigal Barsaid and Nancy Rothbard and Samir Nur Mohammed. And we knew early on that we needed to open up the chat so that students could actually get heard. So we introduced hashtags, and we said, if you have a question, put in hashtag question. If you have a burning question or comment, use hashtag on fire. And if we see that, we'll literally stop in mid-sentence. Floor is yours. I added over time a hashtag for aha if you had a Eureka moment, so I could track whether you were learning something. But the most important one by far was the hashtag debate. If you want to disagree with me or one of your classmates, just tell us that you want to debate or summarize your point of view. For the first time in my career, Erika, instead of calling on a random hand that's up, usually from an extroverted white man by default, right? I could see what perspectives were coming into the conversation, and then I could choreograph a discussion where people built on each other, where they challenged each other. And there was so much depth and so much inclusion of diverse voices because I was able to see what different people were thinking. I want to bring that back into the live classroom. I don't know what that's going to look like yet, but I hope we get to keep it.
But those are exactly the kinds of insights and lessons that we wouldn't be considering at this moment had it not been for the thrust into doing things differently. So thank you for sharing that example. And I'll just share with you, one of the things that we've heard from our students in the midst of the online learning is that faculty to the students feel humanized. Now they can feel a faculty member's humanity because, like what's happening now, we're looking into each other's homes and we can see what they're grappling with. We can see the dog that's barking. We can see the child that's crying in the background. And I think students realize, oh, faculty are people too. And I think that has also helped strengthen the relationship between faculty and students in this effort.
Yeah, I was pretty resistant to that. I guess in Nancy's research, I'm a segmenter. I don't really think about bringing my family to work, even though I bring my work home plenty. And one of our MBA students actually told me last summer. She said, when we've took our spring classes, we really loved it when our faculty brought their family into the classroom. No, absolutely not. That is not for me. And give it about a week, and our 10-year-old daughter was waltzing into the classroom doing an impression of me in front of all of my students. She came in wearing a bald cap and said, "Hello, students, I am Adam Grant, and I am going to fascinate you. And by the way, I'm bald." And I think it was the most fun I've ever had in the classroom. Would not have happened if we were on campus.
Exactly. Exactly. So since we're on this moment of personalness, I wanted to raise something that our audience might not be aware of. Yes, you have written 4 best-selling New York Times best-selling books, but people might not know you've also written 2 children's books. Can you share with us a little bit about the motivation of that and what are the lessons you're trying to share with young people?
Yeah, I think what happened was after I wrote my first book, Give and Take, I got a lot of questions from executives about, okay, I love the idea of bringing generosity into the workplace, but I'm also trying to raise kids who are kind and caring. How do I do that? It's like, I don't know. I'm an organizational psychologist, not a developmental psychologist. Good luck. Eventually I got the question enough that I started reading through more of the research and was struck by the fact that kids get a lot of achievement messages. They don't get a lot of generosity and kindness messages, right? So there was a study of about 10,000 parents and kids recently, which showed that if you ask parents what they want to teach to their kids, they say the most important value that they're trying to convey is a sense of caring and also happiness. If you ask their children, they say, nope, what my parents value most is achievement, success. And it's pretty common, right, that your kids come home from school and you ask, like, okay, how did the test go? How many goals did you score? We have these very clear metrics. What we don't do is ask, well, who did you help this week? And who helped you? So Allison and I were talking about this, and she had this brilliant idea to write a story about generosity that could get kids excited about the joy of giving. And it really grew out of having Amazon packages arrive on our porch, and our kids just thinking like, oh, when I want something, it magically shows up. And she said, what if we write about this experience from the perspective of the gift box and what it means to actually give something as opposed to just get it and feel entitled to it? So that led us to write a children's book. Then she had another idea for another one, and we've had a lot of fun trying to think about the values that I study in the workplace and how they might actually find a place in the home too.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. My first book was called Leading Under Pressure, and it was intended to be a book for executives who are dealing with, crisis-like situations. And I remember when the book was published and I was sharing it with a friend in the neighborhood, and she said, "Oh, is that a parenting book?" And I was like, "Where would that come from?" And then as my own kids grew, it was obvious to me that's what we do. Parents are leading under pressure all of the time. And so it was easy to make that connection. And it sounds like similarly for you with your work.
Yeah, definitely. And, it reminds me a little bit of, I remember when it must have been your first day as dean last summer, you were on the Today Show. And
Good Morning America.
Oh, Good Morning America, even better. I remember watching you, and you were asked, what's the one piece of advice that you would give? And you said, bet on yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I found myself thinking about that and wondering about it from the perspective of intersectionality. Because I worry, I see a lot of overconfident white men who believe that they should be running the world coming into especially our undergraduate classrooms. And I wonder if that's advice that we should qualify, right, depending on people's confidence levels. And I wondered what your take was on that.
Yeah, so I tend to think that even amongst the students that appear to be most confident, most boisterous, the first to raise their hand, the first to sort of shout out the answer, I actually think underlying that is a bit of insecurity, and that's their manifestation of how to address or hide or cover up their insecurity. So I actually think everyone would benefit from the bet on yourself advice, but I think how we interpret that and what that looks like might in fact differ depending on the representation, the identity that you have of yourself. So that would be an interesting study, Adam.
No, I think it would be too, and I think that's a helpful reframe, because I probably misinterpreted some of the advice. When I think about betting on yourself, I think about entrepreneurs that I've advised who ignore their board's feedback, right, or don't listen to customers, and they just continue betting on their failing strategy, and then they end up in this escalation of commitment trap that we love to study, where they throw good money after bad, or they end up just on a path that they wish they hadn't taken. And I think now, hearing you talk about it, I'm realizing betting on yourself is in part not constantly seeking other people's approval, and actually sometimes trusting your judgment about a path that other people might not yet see the potential in.
Yeah. So, and I think this exchange is actually illustrative of your question in terms of intersectionality, because you had a perception of what bet on yourself meant from your identity, your experiences, your background, and I had a slightly different interpretation of what it means to bet on myself, which was, as a Black woman in the environments that I've been on, there has been a lot of self-doubt and self-criticism, and I've had to sort of muster the wherewithal to gain that sort of inner confidence. And so I think we are demonstrating how our identity backgrounds can influence how we think about a lot of different things, which is why these kinds of conversations matter so much.
Yeah, I think so too. I think I've only realized recently that I've had the privilege of living in a world where people take for granted that I'm competent. Like people hear me say something and they think like, oh, like that guy sounds like a Wharton professor. He must know what he's talking about. And so like I have people bet on me in situations where I probably haven't really earned it, and I don't deserve it. And I think that I guess there's a sweet spot in that confidence spectrum where we want to get to. We don't want to have chronic self-doubt. We also don't want to have sort of a level of arrogance that means that you're confident in things that you actually don't know.
Yeah. So I want to, at the outset in the introduction, Peggy introduced us as both organizational psychologists. For those of you in the audience, you should know that we both hail from the University of Michigan's organizational psychology program. So, but we also both find ourselves having spent our professional careers in business schools. I'm curious how you have found psychology influence or determine how you engage with your students, what you teach, what you identify as important content for students, given that most of them come into the world of business thinking that it is a quantitative degree that is very fixed in terms of algorithms and equations.
That's actually why I came to Wharton. There were other business schools that were teaching cases about one lucky company or one unlucky leader. And I wanted to be at a school that was known for analytic horsepower, right? A school that led with data and evidence. And that's actually where I start all my classes on leadership, is to say, okay, look, my gold standard for being data-driven is evidence-based medicine. We have longer and healthier lives as a result of a century of science in that world. And I believe in the same thing when it applies to leadership, right? We should be practicing evidence-based management, which means we do randomized controlled experiments, we do longitudinal studies to try to figure out what works for more of the people more of the time. And what we're going to do in this class is, of course, we're going to illuminate a bunch of the principles by studying particular leaders and organizations. But we're going to start with the data, and then we're going to search out those cases as illustrations, right? As opposed to starting with the cases and then potentially teaching people lessons that are inconsistent or idiosyncratic. And I think one of the things I hear pretty frequently, especially when I work with executive MBAs, is they're at a point in their careers where they say, wow, like some of us, we did undergrad business degrees and we wish we had paid attention to this stuff earlier. And my goal when somebody finishes a class of mine is that they never have that thought again, right? That they invest in building the leadership skills that are going to be relevant to amplifying their impact, to say, you know what, no matter how high you climb in your career, you cannot succeed alone. And in fact, the higher you climb, the more your success depends on the ability to make other people successful. And if you don't invest with the same discipline and the same analytical rigor in figuring out what effective leadership skills look like as you did in operations or in finance, then you're actually limiting your ability to succeed in your career.
Wholeheartedly agree. And it's been fun for me to see you and your management colleagues and others actually who are so data informed in how they build leadership capabilities. And it's interesting, people often refer to the leadership skill sets as the soft skills. And I tell them, and it's been my experience, it's the hardest thing any leader will do, right? Because there's no equation. You can't plug in some numbers and get an answer, right? Every circumstance is different, and it requires your own level of emotional intelligence and intellect and interpersonal savviness to be able to get out the best in the people that you're working with.
That is brilliant. You know what? Okay, I have to change now how I talk about this, because for years I've told students, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring you hard data on soft skills. And what you just made me realize is I'm still implicitly endorsing the idea that these skills are soft. And your reframe to say, actually, these skills are the hardest things to master. I think it actually captures in a much more meaningful way both the importance and the difficulty of practicing the kinds of skills we teach as psychologists. So I will be quoting you on that one. And there's no more hard data for soft skills. The skills are hard.
The skills are hard. You know what? I feel like this is now the second time where you've said I've helped you reframe something. So I'm not sure this interview is going to get any better at this point. It's not every day that someone could say they helped teach Adam Grant two things in 30 minutes. But I know we're going to be taking some questions from the audience very shortly. So let me just get to the last one or two questions. And that is, as you've been at Wharton now for, I think, 12 years, and you obviously have evolved in your own stature as a faculty member and in your understanding of what is needed as a faculty member in business education now. How have you seen the Wharton School change in those dozen years or so that you've been affiliated?
I think there have been a bunch of changes. I think the biggest one by far has been a broadening of what the school's vision and values look like. When I arrived at Wharton in 2009, we were basically a finance school. And I don't mean that in the sense that all 280 some faculty were doing finance, right? But from a reputation and brand standpoint, we were known for finance. And we were just beginning to come out of a financial crisis. We saw the number of investment bankers dramatically dwindle. We saw a rise in interest in tech, in entrepreneurship, and in consulting and a bunch of other areas. And all of a sudden, I think the great analytical work that was being done across every department started to rise to the surface of who we are and what we stand for. And I think now whenever somebody asks me about Wharton, I remember in 2009, people were like, wait, why are you going to the Temple of Finance to study things like helpfulness and altruism and psychology? And now the question I get is, how do you think about applying data to every field? And I think that's our brand really catching up to what the school has stood for a longer period of time. But I love the fact now that our students come and they ask, can you point me to some studies on this? How do I stay up to speed with the research when I finish business school? Knowing that part of being a lifelong learner is recognizing that knowledge changes, right? And that the material that normally hides in academic journals, when it's made accessible, can actually make organizations better and can advance our careers. And the fact that now we have students coming in having engaged with books, podcasts, articles that are science-based and data-driven, I think is a real reflection of the fact that now Wharton is known as the data school.
Yeah. People often ask me, what's been the biggest surprise in the year that I've been here? And it is just that. It's, we have this public persona as being the finance school, and yet the breadth of expertise that exists across all of the disciplines, even disciplines that aren't necessarily tied to business. So in healthcare, and we have sociologists on our faculty, we have engineers on our faculty, we have psychologists on our faculty, and all of those different academic disciplines are integrated and infiltrated in the curricula, which just leads to such a more holistic approach to understanding what it means to be in business.
I remember a couple of years ago having dinner with one of our most illustrious alums, Elon Musk, and asking him where he goes for leadership advice. And he said, I read biographies of great leaders. And that was a sign to me that Elon's Wharton education failed. Right, that somebody who's so science oriented and knows so much about physics and engineering was not even aware, let alone drawing on, systematic evidence in the realm of leadership and management, to me, was a failure of an old version of Wharton. And I think the next generation, luckily, is in a position to know that.
So my last question then for you is, as you think about the skills that are necessary going forward, what should we be sure to integrate into our curriculum that will help really prepare the next generation for the kinds of challenges that they will be facing when they are in the workforce?
I think if I were going to invest in one set of skills, it would probably be collaborative problem solving. I think that probably brings together a bunch of the leadership capabilities that we know are important, with the ability to apply the analytical rigor to pinpoint, okay, what is the root cause of the issues we're seeing and how are we going to tackle it? And some of the communication that you've studied in a lot of your research, right, on what leaders do effectively in crisis, to say it doesn't matter how well you can solve a problem. If you can't explain to other people what's going wrong and how to fix it, then you're not going to make a whole lot of progress. So I think that that's probably where I would invest if I were charting our future. What about you?
I do think that the ability to integrate across areas, so it's business and the arts, it's business and engineering, it's business and humanities, it's business and medicine. The more we can find ways to integrate the work from any academic discipline more holistically is what I think we all have to be thinking in that regard, and no siloed function is going to be able to address the complexity of the kinds of challenges that we're facing in our country, much less the world. So, which is not that different from collaborative problem solving, right? So, all right, well, Adam, it was fun for me. I know we've got lots of people with questions that they want to chat with you or us about, so let's bring in Alex.
Yeah, no, thank you guys. It's been an incredible 30 minutes or so, and I can't tell you how many questions have come in. What I've done over the course of the past 30 minutes or so is just try to truncate them and to make them as applicable to the discussions that the two of you have had. One point that that we brought up in this discussion was the soft skill of leadership. How what is considered a soft skill is in fact one of the hardest competencies for one to work on, and it takes work. I want to take a bit of a step back because we were discussing sort of the future leader, and I kind of want to go back 10 years ago, and there were a couple of things that I was referencing. One, Erika, you mentioned your book, Leading Under Pressure, and around the same time, Adam, there was a lecture that you had at Wharton around the power of leading quietly. I'm curious if we can go back to that time frame 10 years ago, where Erika, you're presenting thought-provoking research around leading under pressure. Adam, you're talking about leadership in a quiet manner. What does that leader look like 10 years ago versus the leader of today, building upon what you've described as a leader for tomorrow?
I'm gonna let Erika start because one of us actually leads, the other only studies it.
So, you know, I think 10 years ago, we still had a pretty singular imagery of what leadership looked like. And it was largely based on the, you know, military model. It was a command and control model. And I think we were starting to see a shift in that. And I think especially over the past 10 years, and I think even more especially over the last 2 to 5 years, we've seen more leaders acknowledge and engage in practices of behavior that are much more inclusive, that are much more inquiry-based, that are much more collaborative, that are much more engaging. And one of the tenets that I think is just absolutely fundamental to good leaders is the ability to build trust, and the ability to be perceived as trustworthy, and the ability to identify where there's opportunity for enhancing the trust that exists either in an interpersonal relationship with the people that you're working with, or trust within the teams, or quite frankly, trust in the organization or the institution. And I think in the absence of trust, it becomes nearly impossible to achieve the goals that you have as a leader or as an organization.
Yeah, I think when I was studying quiet leadership, I was really reflecting on the fact that extroverts are more likely to become leaders than introverts. But in my data, there was no difference whatsoever in the effectiveness of introverted and extroverted leaders. And in fact, with employees who are proactive, who are bringing ideas and suggestions to the table, introverted leaders actually outperformed extroverted leaders for exactly the reasons that Erika is describing. They tended to listen, which meant that their employees felt heard and valued and trusted. They also then got better ideas, which they were able to act on. And sadly, a lot of extroverts were really determined to take the spotlight, and they were threatened when people below them spoke up and maybe challenged their authority a little bit. I think if you fast forward, and Alex, to your question of what does that look like now, I think the most effective leaders I have watched during the pandemic, again, informed by the data, have really led with humility. They've led, some of the examples that I've thought illustrate this well are Jacinda Ardern or Adam Silver, both very quick to take drastic action around the pandemic last March, and basically saying up front, we don't know. We don't know how COVID spreads. We don't know how to stop it. And so we're going to make some decisions. And as we learn, we may change our minds, right? And the message to their teams internally, I know in Adam's case, was very much, we're not sure how we're going to get our season back on track or if we will, but I'm confident that the group of people with me here can figure it out together. And I think leaders, having the courage, right, and the security to say, I don't know, and I might be wrong, is exactly what we need. And I wish it didn't take a pandemic for us to finally learn that.
That's great. I can speak just from my personal experience as a co-founder. I was earlier this morning sending messages through our Slack channel internally with a senior leader who's frustrated, who's really, really frustrated about what's happening in the moment. And in this moment, what I had to do was take a bit of a step back and say, what are the things that we're testing? Why are we testing them? And what are we going to do with these rapid tests that we want to do? Ultimately, we want to test, we want to assess rapidly. We want to make decisions off of those assessments. And I appreciate that perspective, because for me to get to that point, it required one thing that you mentioned, Adam, and I want to build upon that, and that is listening and the power of listening. And a few years ago, or perhaps could have been more recently, you had mentioned it kind of matters who you're listening to. And oftentimes we all find a certain level of comfort in listening to the opinions of those that in a way make us feel good, as opposed to maybe listening to the opinions that make us think hard. Can you both comment on that? Because as a leader, it's so important, especially in the environment that we're in, to be listening, to be humble, to be genuine and honest. But it is important that we listen to the people that are going to challenge us. But I'm curious what you both think about that.
Yeah, every leader listens to their cheerleaders, right? The real test of leadership is, do you listen to your critics? And I have worked with and watched too many leaders who fail to do that. I think you can even see it in your own life if you look at who you follow on social media. Right? I noticed as I was writing Think Again that I mostly followed people whose conclusions I agreed with. And I realized that what I should be paying attention to is not the answers people reach, but do I respect the integrity of their thought process? So I shifted my focus to, does this person ask important questions? Do they go about exploring those questions in a rigorous way? And those are the people I want to learn from, whether they arrived at the same ends as I did or not. And oftentimes those are the people who are best positioned to help me rethink things. I think as a leader, what that means is you need not just a support network, but a challenge network, a group of thoughtful critics who see your blind spots, who you trust to tell you what you need to rethink. And one of the things that I've done since writing the book is I have gone to a bunch of those critics and I've said, hey, you may not know this, but I consider you a founding member of my challenge network. Then I had to explain what a challenge network was. And I said, I have not always taken your feedback well. Sometimes I've gotten defensive, other times I've just been distracted, but I know I need you to push me to rethink things. If you ever hesitate because you're worried that you're going to hurt the relationship or hurt my feelings, don't. The only way you can hurt me is by not telling me the truth. I've gotten much better feedback since I had those conversations. I think we all have a responsibility to have those discussions as leaders.
Yeah, I'll just echo what Adam is saying. And the real need for leaders is not to assume that that kind of challenge feedback is going to come naturally, but we have to we have to solicit it, we have to ask for it, and we have to be very proactive in seeking that out, because people are uncomfortable or feel as if it's not their place to challenge the leader, if you will. And unless we are very explicit in letting them know that's the expectation, we're not going to get the kind of information that we need.
That resonates in a number of ways, and one common occurrence through the chat box during this discussion was the importance of diversity, and I kind of want to tie back to the points that you just brought up in making oneself amenable to having a challenge network. And I can see myself almost sort of falling into the trap of having a challenge network that looks a certain way or has a certain type of background or in a perspective. Going back to your research, Erika, you had, I think, a few years ago, published an article on real diversity means the ability to think differently. Mm-hmm. So can you tie in diversity and, to your point, Adam, the challenge network? What sort of challenge network should we be building? Who do we go to help us round that out?
So I'll share an insight that I had several years ago. I was studying trust, and I asked people to create a diagram of their network of relationships and the extent to which they trusted the people in their network on 3 different dimensions: their competence, their ability to be transparent and communicate and also maintain confidences, and that their follow through, that they're actually going to do what they say they're going to do. And it was interesting, first, that most people who are identified in someone's trust network were demographically homogenous. They were similar to the individual, which is in and of itself no surprise. But when there was distinction or heterogeneity in their network, what you found is that people would receive higher trust ratings the more similar they were demographically, right? And so seeing that on paper, because it was a visual representation of one's trust network, seeing that on paper, I think caused people that I was working with, executives, to really question the value of the network that they have, and could they actually have the kind of challenge conversations with the networks that they were inclined to create.
Yeah, I guess I would just build on that a little bit and say that it's so easy to surround yourself with people who share similarities with you. And sometimes it's race or gender, sometimes it's you grew up in the same hometown or you had the same hobbies. And I think that the reality is that we're more comfortable with those people. We also learn less from them because they tend to reinforce the things that we already know. And I think the research that Kathy Phillips did a few years ago on how diverse groups feel more uncomfortable, but they actually end up making smarter decisions and coming up with more creative solutions to problems, in part because of the discomfort. That when you feel uncomfortable with somebody, you prepare more, you explain yourself more thoroughly and clearly, you listen more carefully. And I think that what that's taught me is that we need to get a little bit more comfortable being uncomfortable. Then I always worry, right, that I bring a diverse group together, we start to get to know each other well. Oh no, we're too comfortable. Are we going to stop challenging each other? No, of course not, because we're still benefiting from different backgrounds and experiences and expertise. But I think that's something we all need to check ourselves on pretty regularly.
Yeah, and this work is actually rooted in sociology. There's a faculty member years ago who did this work on the strength of ties, and there are strong ties and weak ties. And weak ties are really people that you know less well, and the way we oftentimes identify people we know less well is that they are different from us. They've had different experiences. But the value and the richness of the information that comes from our weak tie relationships is far more productive information than the information that we get from strong ties, people that we know well, because to Adam's point, they're just going to reinforce what we already know. So we're not getting new ideas, we're not getting new information.
I have to add to this. This is what happens when you get 2 organizational psychologists together, right? Oh, that sparked another study. Let me jump on that. But when we teach executives, one of the big paradoxes that comes up is, okay, but I want the trust of the strong tie. I want the novel information of the weak tie. Can I get the best of both worlds? And there's some great research by Daniel Levin and his colleagues on what are called dormant ties, people you used to know, that shows you can get the best of both worlds from them. One of the best executive MBA classroom assignments that I've ever seen is you get sent out to reconnect with 3 dormant ties. Pick 3 people you've lost touch with and get back in contact with them. It turns out if you do that, you get better information from those dormant ties than you would have from a current contact. Because just like your weak ties, they've been traveling in different circles, they've been meeting different people and learning different things. But like your strong ties, you have a reservoir of trust, you have shared history, and it's way easier to reach out to someone you used to know than someone you hardly know. And I think the great news about this research is a lot of executives would groan and say, well, some ties are dormant for a reason. And actually, no, most ties are not dormant for a reason. We changed jobs, we got busy, we moved. We didn't mean to fall out of touch. And I think in the data, 93% of people, in addition to learning things, actually enjoy the experience. They find it energizing. So I think everybody should reconnect with at least one dormant tie every month.
Very interesting. Now, we are speaking to two psychologists. I'm going to throw a third one in here to add the next question, and it's one of your counterparts, Angela Duckworth, who of course has done incredible research, as you know, on perseverance and grit particularly. So when I think of grit, I think of focus, I think of tunnel vision, I think of, in some cases, stubbornness. I'll be the first one to admit I am quite stubborn as an only child and many other factors. How do the leaders that are stubborn, that almost say, I don't need the data, I don't need market research, I'm Steve Jobs, I have a vision, and we're gonna make a phone that doesn't have a dial. How do you balance that stubbornness or the necessity of it or the lack thereof with what you describe, Adam, in your book as mental flexibility? Is there listening fatigue? If you're constantly listening, at some point decisions have to be made. So stubbornness versus flexibility, where does that all play out in your eyes?
There's so many things to say on that. I'll weigh in quickly and say two things. Number one, we need to bust the myth of Steve Jobs, right? The reality is that almost every major innovation that Apple made in 1997 and beyond, he had to be dragged into by his team of engineers and designers. He swore he wasn't going to make a phone. He refused to make a music player for a while. He didn't want to stream audio or video, right? And it was the ability of his team to change his mind and get him to think again that actually drove a big part of Apple's renaissance. I could go on for at least an hour about this because I wrote a whole article about it, but I think that's the first thing. The second thing is you need a framework for when to stick to your guns and when to think again. And my favorite framework is just to draw a 2x2 and ask, with the decision I'm making right now, how high are the stakes first? And then second, how reversible is it? If you are dealing with a high stakes, irreversible decision, you should be open-minded up front. You want to gather as much information as possible. You want to be mentally flexible because it really matters and you can't just undo it tomorrow. If you lower the stakes or you raise the reversibility, be decisive, execute, act quickly. You can always rethink it on the back end.
Very interesting. Erika,
yes, I think with respect to the Steve Jobs example, I think one way to consider this is being data-driven versus data-informed. And data-driven sort of assumes that whatever the data say is the direction I, as the leader, am going to go. Data-informed means let me understand what the data are telling me, but at the end of the day, I still have some autonomy in the decision making. And I think what we're looking for in our leaders is to be able to sort of take the complexity of all the information that's presented to him or her and make a wise decision.
And that is my rethinking moment number 3 today. I was intrigued earlier, Erika, when you paused and you said that my work was data informed. And I actually made a mental note to ask you later, did you deliberately avoid saying data driven? Now I know why. And I think you're right. Sometimes the data don't have all the answers. Sometimes the data come from 3 years ago and you have to make a decision that's projecting 3 years into the future. I love this idea of being data informed, and I now have to add it to my vocabulary. Thank you.
Well, I wish I could take credit for that, but a colleague at another institution, Belva White, was the one who sort of made that distinction for me, and I have found it to be so resonant with how I need to lead. So yeah, good. Glad it's helpful.
Great, fantastic. We have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions, and so I kind of want to have us all take a bit of a step back. We've had a number of interesting aha moments, many, at least 3 for Adam that he's pointed out, many more, I would say, for myself and for many that are attending. looking ahead, the audience that's in this webinar are leaders within an organization. They are probably working in a leadership structure right now that looks a lot different than it did this time last year. It will continue to change for many. Any words of advice, suggestions on the year ahead, the next year ahead, that you can share based upon our discussions today and some of the things that come to mind?
So I'll just start with, nobody knows, right? Nobody could have predicted 18 months into the pandemic, we would still be dealing with the repercussions of the pandemic, and nobody knows how it's going to evolve in the next 18 months. And so I think the lesson in all of this is we have to remain open, we have to remain flexible, we have to be willing to adapt and continue to pivot. And that has to be the strength, our superpower, right, going forward is remaining open, because as we have seen, the world is going to continue to change, and we're not going back to normal. In fact, everything is going to be changing, and probably at an even faster clip than it has over the past 18 months, and we have to develop the muscle to be able to live in that change.
Agreed. And I think that I'm watching a lot of leaders try to implement plans right now for what hybrid work is going to look like and when people are going to be in the office. This is the worst time to make a commitment. It's the perfect time to run more experiments. Think about how much we have learned in the past year, right? From trying out working virtually, from figuring out new ways of collaborating. We should not let that learning stop. We should be figuring out what are the first 6 or 7 experiments I want to run, and then report back afterward. And that's part of how you invest in building a learning culture.
Fantastic. I speak on behalf of the audience when I say you've helped us think and rethink and provided a number of different frameworks that we could now dive deeper into. It's very clear to me from listening to both of you, and this is certainly a rapidly changing world, that learning to question your opinions and to being vulnerable is a good thing, and to listen and to admit what you don't know and what you don't understand, and to make decisions off of a group that's providing a diverse perspective on how to go about making decisions and leading an organization, I think is looking a lot different these days. So being mindful of everyone's time, on behalf of Ivy Exec and all that have been involved, thank you both, Erika and Adam. This was a great discussion. I'm honored to have been a part of it. And we look forward to all of you that attended our webinar today. We look forward to having you see the next one. Enjoy. Have the great rest of the day. Thanks, Erika. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you. Go Quakers.
Go Blue.
Right.